All right, it's 22 minutes before 7 here on the program. A very good morning to you. According to the South African National Council for the Blind, approximately 7.5% of South Africans are disabled and visually impaired. And of course, this is still the most prevalent disability. Now, a report titled Left in the Dark has been released by Section 27 and details the failure to provide access quality education to blind and partially sighted learners in South Africa. Section 27 is a public interest law centre that seeks to influence, develop and use the law to protect human rights. Justice Zak Yacoob, the chairman of the Mobility for the Blind Trust, as well as a board member at Section 27, joins us now to discuss the issue. So good to have you on the program. Thank you very, very much for being with us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Now, Left in the Dark really does focus a lot on how the visually impaired have not been catered to. What are some of the biggest issues pertaining to the blind?
Well, the biggest broad issue is that what the government does is that they paint disability with one brush. So that they think that inclusive education for all people with disability is the same. But it's not the same, because if a person has a wheelchair disability, then all you need are ramps, and you take the wheelchaired person to up the ramp and at a desk, and you've done it.
Yeah.
If it's a person who is blind, you can't give him hearing aids or a wheelchair. You need different things. You need experts in Braille to teach them Braille. We need experts in mobility and orientation to ensure that blind people are able to understand the space around them and are able to move around and so on. And you need a whole range of other techniques at that level. If you are partially blind, you need spectacles and that sort of thing. If you're a deaf person, you need a completely different thing. You need sign language, you need hearing aids and so on. It's this differentiation which doesn't happen. And schools for the blind are quite bad, in the sense that the money spent on them is little. The conditions are bad, in the sense that the buildings are all in a miserable condition. There are all sorts of dangerous things all over the place. And as you can understand, if you have a kid who can't see, those building dangers are much worse than other people.
I mean, according to the report and having a look at some of the things that are coming out there, I mean, it basically says that these schools are in a state of crisis. What needs to be done? What do we need to do to uplift them?
What they need to do is to have a special division to look at the whole problem of education of visually impaired children afresh. They need to work out what to do, how to do it, and they need to go ahead and do it. Then, if we itemize it, there are loads and loads of things to be done. We need qualified Braille teachers, we need qualified mobility instructors, we need to ensure that the children have enough food at the school, we need to make sure that the staff are properly qualified, we need to make sure that the buildings are properly maintained, we need to make sure that all these sorts of things happen. So the problems are everywhere. It's not and you see, the interesting problem is that racism continues to prevail, because the white schools for visually impaired children were the best before. The Indian school, there was only one, which was okay, somewhere in the middle, and the African schools, which were started quite late, by the way, were quite in a miserable state. And that has still followed us. You know, many people believe that apartheid didn't have an impact on people with disability. And it really did, because African blind and deaf and other disability people were in a much worse position. And in a sense, poverty, I suppose, is the biggest disability. And the problem really is this, that you're going to have a lot of poor children, most of whom are going to be African children, who are going to become adults if nothing is done in 15 or 20 years' time, with no stake in society, no ability to make any contribution to it, and absolute misfits. And so the later the problem is fixed, the more you create the danger of having uneducated blind adults around who have not received the ability to cope with society and to live side by side with their sighted counterparts.
Which is an absolute injustice when we hear what you're talking about. But we look at Section 27, and obviously you're doing a lot of work behind the scenes and working with a lot of partners, training teachers, getting these facilities right. What are you doing? I mean, what are you doing to ensure that these needs are met?
We want government to make sure that the things are met. So far, all we are doing is pressuring government.
Okay.
We are looking at other things. Last night I met somebody on the aeroplane who was from the Eastern Cape, who does business there, government projects. And he said to me that they work, I should let them know where the schools are in the Eastern Cape. And this business, which is involved in energy production, renewable energy production, at a government level, says they might be able to take over one of those schools and make sure that everything is properly done there. So we are looking at those sorts of initiatives as well, public-private partnerships
Indeed.
with money and so on.
Yeah, which I think is a great solution as well to this. But thank you so much, Justice. Thank you very much for being with us here on the program. Justice Zak Yacoob is the chair of the Mobility for the Blind Trust and board member for Section 27. So it's the report that was released talking about the terrible state that schools that cater for, particularly focusing in on blind school children and scholars, and how bad the state of them is. So hopefully a lot will be done with this report. All right, let's take a break here on the program. We'll have more after this. Stay tuned.